Then you decided to crash Bobby's funeral. Most people crash parties. You crash funerals.
But I guess funerals are kind of like parties for you, right, Frank?
You have no idea what funerals are like for me.
So I've played a lot of comic book games over the years, some good, some very bad, but one game that's always stuck with me over the last 2 decades is 2005's The Punisher, a game based on one of Marvel's most brutal characters. So I'm not much of a comic book guy. I mean, I remember seeing the Punisher movie a few times years ago and it was pretty decent, but in the modern day I don't really go out of my way to watch this kind of stuff. The character of the Punisher, however, I always saw potential in, and I loved this game as a kid. It's been a long time between drinks with old Frank Castle, so let's see how this game holds up after 20 years.
Fuck's sake.
So let's get stuck into this, shall we?
My whole family died in a mob hit. I should have died too. I took enough bullets, but I lived. I finally figured out why.
Alright, so we start off with our guy, Frank Castle, waiting around for a few gang members to murder, which goes down in an awesomely bloody fashion. Upon leaving the building, we walk into the police and decide to go freely. We then cut to Rikers Island Maximum Security Prison, where we have a chat with Detective Soap and Detective Rick Doffin. They're asking a bunch of questions, wondering why we're in the Takagi building the night before when I think it's pretty obvious we were there to murder everyone. We're not given much info, so they want to go back to 3 weeks earlier to a crack house that we decided to clean up, with bullets. And this is where our game begins. We start in this alley, helping out this lady that should absolutely not be here at this time of the evening. Anyway, we sort out the bloke and move on. A few blokes in the crack house are seeing how far they can throw a few blokes, so we decide to go in and congratulate them for their efforts, and this should do it. We start making our way through the joint pretty quickly, and holy shit, look at that reprojection TV. These guys don't stand a chance, we're just toying with them at this point. After enough messing around, we finish off the last of them. Some bloke nearly hits us on our way out, but that's one less crack house to worry about.
New York City never changes. No one catches you when you fall.
This is a pretty decent first level, and it gives you a good idea of the mechanics that you're going to be using throughout the game. And it's only going to get more brutal from here. Now the plates on the car we traced to a local chop shop, so we thought we'd take our car in for a service. We might have caught them by surprise, but it appears everyone here has guns, because of fucking course they do, but it doesn't get in our way too much. Now this place is massive, but eventually we run into this guy that looks like he runs the joint. He reckons he just takes orders from some bloke named Bobby Nucci, and after we get all we need, we decide it requires a little bit of downsizing. Fucking hardcore. After this, we kill a few more dozen blokes, pat ourselves on the back for a good night out, and head off to Lucky's bar to take care of Bobby Nucci. Hey, it's Soapy. What's he doing in a shithole like this? He looks a bit crook, so he misses out on the fun while we take care of the whole bar and kill Bobby in a pretty underwhelming fight.
Damn it, Castle. This was my favorite bar.
Nucci's ma seems pissed because they've managed to get some guy named Bushwhacker to kidnap our neighbour, Joan. We apparently have to meet at the zoo, which is a really odd meeting spot for such a thing, and why does he have a gun for an arm? Anyway, we arrive and start asking questions, and whoops, never mind. Each section has a pretty sizable wave of baddies. You'd be scratching your head as to how they ended up with this many goons, but Bushwhacker keeps retreating, so we keep pushing. Now, old mate here doesn't want to open the gate until we kill the rest of these fellas, like I needed an excuse. But Bushwhacker seems to have put Joan in a cage and leaves us with a choice to chase him or save her from piranhas, so we save him for another day. So we lower the water level, kill the rest of these baddies, and have a quick yarn and get the fuck out of there. We've got to end this though, so after all that we decide we need to go after Bobby Nucci's family at the funeral. We start off by chucking Bobby in the bin and getting into the casket. I'm sure you can see where this is going. We perform some of our favourite funeral activities and make our way to the basement. They aren't here, so we start demanding some answers. This shit really does just keep getting more hardcore as it goes along. We blow up some drugs and make our way upstairs, where we eventually find Eddie Nucci, and This turns into a decent enough little boss fight where you need to slowly pop him off while his goons keep piling in. It's pretty spongy, but eventually we get the job done and out the window he goes. With him out of the way, it's time to go after Marnucci. At her joint, we run into Old Man again and for some reason decide to run towards him while he fires at us. Like, how the fuck did you expect that to work out? Now we have to make our assault from the wine cellar, and these guys aren't too keen on us being here. But surely after this, they must be running out of bad guys. Bushwhacker shows up again too, and after a bit of a fight, we finally put him down for the last time, after which we cap off our night by throwing Marnucci out the window. We decide to go fuck up the drug operation they had going on down at the docks, where we find Black Widow as well as plenty of Russian and Japanese bad guys. The Yakuza are here to take over the docks, but there won't be much left once we blow up the ship. The night's going pretty well, but we get separated from Black Widow in this warehouse where we have to fight this tank that is so fucking easy it's actually insulting, and of course she shows up right after the battle.
Sorry, they wouldn't wait.
The nuclear device also will not wait.
After all this, we're apparently going to go blow up some Russian ships now to stop nukes or something? I don't know. But apparently the nuke we're after isn't here according to this guy I killed, but there's some women being trafficked, so we kill the main baddie and get them out of there. Yeah, this story just got way crazier now that there's nukes and shit involved. It's so silly, I love it. Back at our apartment, we get a visitor, courtesy of the Russian baddie that we pissed off, and this turns into quite a fight. We hit this guy pretty hard and he just keeps tossing us around the place like we're nothing. Eventually we toss him out the window, but when we take a look, he seems to have gotten away alive. No time to sit around though, we've got to go and kill this Krieghoff fella who's looking to do some pretty nasty shit to America with this nuke that he's got on this island. We've got a sniper rifle this time, so we blow off a few heads, shove this guy in a fan, feed the local wildlife, and meet up with this Nick Fury guy who helps us make our assault. Now his AI is a bit dense and manages to get himself caught by the Russian, who looks pissed. We go down and fight the Russian in what turns out to be a pretty underwhelming two-phase boss fight. Then we go and set Krieghoff alight before stealing a plane and getting the hell out of there before the nuke goes off. Apparently the Nucci's and the Russians are both controlled by this Kingpin guy, so we decide to go pay him a visit. We run into Bullseye, a baddie here to protect him, and this turns into a pretty underwhelming three-phase boss fight as we progress through the building. Once he's dealt with, we find this Kingpin guy who insists that he's not who we're after, and it looks like he's right, because now we've got to deal with these Yakuza guys. It's kind of a challenge, but we manage to escape and meet an informant who says this other fella named Jigsaw is really who's pulling the strings around here.
There's a Yakuza gang, the Eternal Sun, moving in on the Nucci and Mercs operation you'd cleaned out.
And?
Guy named Takagi heads the gang, but Jigsaw's become his lieutenant somehow.
While we wait for some more information on the Eternal Sun, we tie up a few loose ends at the docks with the help of S.H.I.E.L.D. Then we finish up the drug operations at the meat processing plant. After this is sorted, we have another chat with our informant about old mate Jigsaw, who in a crazy twist is the guy who killed our family. On top of all this, they're going to try and rob Stark Industries for that Iron Man tech, so we head over there to show them how it works. Now there's a lot of guys here, I must have killed half the city at this point. And they've even got a helicopter for us to shoot down. Iron Man himself even shows up to suss the damage, but we're long gone at this point to head over to Takagi's joint. With a little bit of light convincing, we get this guy to open up his personal elevator, and when we meet Takagi, he doesn't exactly have the best news for us.
Jigsaw has used us both. You, he has used to weaken the Kingpin's criminal empire. Me, he has used the power I foolishly granted him to advance within my organization, winning over my employees to his purposes.
So everyone's been double-crossed. We kill old mate, and after a pretty wild shootout, we're back to where we started at the beginning of the game. Now apparently Jigsaw, or John Sane, is housed in this prison with us, and Soapy is on our side the whole time, helping us make our escape. Things aren't going too well in the prison with a huge riot going on, but we still manage to find time to give someone an early execution. Eventually we get to the rooftop where Jigsaw has chucked on his Iron Man armor, which they managed to put together in a really short amount of time. And what follows is another pretty underwhelming boss fight. Anyway, we sort him out, save Soapy, toss Jigsaw out of the helicopter and fly off into the night with some nice post-credit sequel bait that never happened.
If I let this stand, my enemies will see it as a fatal weakness. The Punisher must die, and at my hands.
Well, that got pretty crazy, didn't it? I mean, I kind of enjoyed it though, but you have this jump from fighting crime families to suddenly there's nukes involved, and then you're fighting the guy who killed your family, and he's in an Iron Man suit. It's so silly, but I don't know. At the end of the day, that's kind of the point of comic book stories. But yeah, let's move on to the rest of it, shall we? As a bit of a later Xbox title, The Punisher handles the fundamentals pretty well, but it can be a little bit of a mixed bag overall. Starting off, the graphics are pretty decent for the time. There's certainly good and bad points, but Frank Castle looks awesome. They definitely put the effort in to make him look like a big tough figure with a presence to match. Most of the side characters do have a fair share amount of detail for the era, and talking animations are pretty good. There's certainly effort being made to have the core characters of the game feel like they should, and as serious as the game takes itself, it also comes off just as silly. I mean, you've got this dark, gritty world where you're fighting crackheads in these rundown buildings, but then later on you've got these heroes and villains with silly names getting involved in this much larger scheme, and now suddenly you're trying to stop these bad guys from killing a whole bunch of people. If you're expecting something a bit more grounded in reality, this just isn't going to be it, but at the end of the day, it is based on a comic book character in a world full of superheroes, so you do expect that vibe to creep in. With all that said, the world sells itself quite well. Showing the dark grittiness of the city and its people is well done, and as you'd expect, much of the vibe you get from the city is down to how well the Punisher himself describes it. Thomas Jane comes back as the character after portraying him in the 2004 film, and while I haven't seen that movie in many years, I remember it being alright. Jane is definitely having a good time with this role, and really everyone in the main cast does well enough. You tend to expect at least some level of quality in games by 2005. I will say though, it's funny that you're dealing with these super dangerous bad guys who have all these resources and hundreds of goons who all happen to know where you live, but send one guy around to take you out and I guess just hope everything works out. It wasn't quite as silly in the movie, as the bad guys weren't nearly to this level, but you'd think if they were that worried about this guy, they'd send a pretty big group of guys around, or even just level the fucking building. I don't know, it's just a game, but I had a chuckle over that little detail. Now, the world of the Punisher is one thing, but let's talk about the real meat of the game, and that's the combat. So, as we know, this game was a little bit controversial in its day for the often brutal violence, but looking at it now all these years later, it's pretty clear that it's quite tame by modern standards. The actual controlling of the game is comfortable enough, as you'd expect from shooters by 2005, but there can be a little bit of clunkiness, especially in hairy situations. Weapons do feel good for the most part though, and there are plenty of positives in the overall experience. As you progress through the game, you will start to run into some pretty spongy bad dudes that you'll need to land some pretty consistent headshots on, otherwise you'll quite often find yourself rushing a lot of enemies to bring them down with a melee attack. These are pretty damn satisfying and adds a lot of fun to the gameplay, which was already complemented by a sizey weapon list. You'll slowly be unlocking different guns throughout the game that are mostly great and help keep things fresh throughout. It's a little annoying that for a game so over the top, you still get limited to 2 weapons at a time, so you can't hold more than 2 of the same pistol or 2 of the same machine gun, which works for games trying to be a little bit more grounded, but this is a silly comic book game where I'm fighting villains in stupid outfits. The game will try to encourage you to use different weapons, but you'll obviously pick your favourites and whatever is reliable in the later stages of the game. I would have liked melee weapons to be a little bit more useful, but at least they're there a bit. One thing you will often exploit is the human shield mechanic, which can also help a lot in hairy situations, and let's not forget the slaughter mode, which can very easily help you clear out a room if need be. I don't really use this mode early in the game, I would often forget about it, but later on you'll be glad that you've got the ability to become a knife-wielding maniac who can't take damage and just annihilates anything in your way. When it came to the combat upgrades, I realised I should be putting points into this and not just picking ammo or armor or whatever. The stat upgrades are a nice touch overall too, and you'll need to use the points that you build up during each mission to pay for them. On top of that, you will get graded at the end of each level, as well as unlock a challenge mode for anyone looking for something extra, and you can replay any of these levels at any time. Completing each level has some cool little extras like newspaper clippings and stuff, and the apartment menu is fun to navigate. Overall general gameplay is pretty fun, but holy shit do the boss fights fucking suck. I really started to dread these sections throughout the game because any sort of boss section felt like it was an afterthought and just felt straight up unfinished. It's not like they're even hard, but they can just be mighty tedious. A lot of the time your shots won't even harm these guys, so you're just running around waiting for an opportunity to be able to land any damage when they have an opening. It just takes way too long for such little depth in the gameplay. It's like they spent all their time really getting a lot of the other parts of the game right, then put this shit together in a week. I mean, the interrogation mechanics are so cool. You have all these interesting ways of approaching them, and on top of that, have some censored, but still often brutal kills on these bad guys. That's what was really fleshed out in this game. It is a mini-game in itself, and when pulled off, revives a little bit of health, which is super handy at the right time. I don't think the boss fights bring down the gameplay entirely, but they are something to keep in mind as a crap part of the experience. There's fun to be had here, and while the levels are quite linear and can feel a little bit empty, it's a decent effort with a fitting soundtrack to match the vibe. Anyway, I've gone on a fair bit, so let's wrap this one up. I did enjoy coming back to this game after all these years, and while the execution can be a little bit rough here and there, I did find a fair bit to like about it. This game isn't going to blow anyone's minds in the current day, nor would it be expected to, but As a schlocky action game based on one of the cooler comic book characters, The Punisher at times does manage to impress. For me, The Punisher is a good game. It deserves a 7 out of 10. I mean, it's a little bit of a mixed bag here and there, but for anyone interested in a more brutal take on a comic book character in a video game, then go suss this one out and have some fun with it. Anyway, I'll catch you next time.